Hey, DawgNation, I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. You will notice that I have a Gator Hater paraphernalia-style shirt on, dog chomping down on the Gator, because that is exactly what we believe is going to happen on Saturday. We are ready to go for the cocktail party. I got a huge announcement coming up this week about something really fun we're going to do. I can't quite give you all the details yet, but I've just gotten approval to do something really, really fun. This is going to be amazing. Cannot wait for Georgia, Florida. We're going to make the most of the cocktail party and just turn it into, as much as we can, a big time event for Georgia to get a big win over a rival that you don't need any more reasons to dislike than you already do. In fact, why don't we begin today's show on that very point? Stakes are incredibly high. Coaches acting in unorthodox, unusual ways. What does it all mean? Well, I think it means that Saturday's showdown is as big as it gets. Let's talk about that. Everything else going on around Georgia football as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I think there's something really interesting happening around college football, and I'm not sure you've noticed it. Let me try to explain it this way. Here's what we've told players about the 2020 season. We've essentially told them, for you, this doesn't really matter. You can choose to play if you want in the face of a global pandemic, or you can choose to sit the year out. You can go ahead and start your NFL prep early, or if you're just uncomfortable playing, you can choose not to play. And for those of you that do play, we're actually not going to count this year against your eligibility. You can come back if you want to. You can move on if you want to. For you, 2020 is essentially just a free year to use as you want to use it. However, I hope you've noticed that while for players there's a little bit of freedom to kind of play, not play, stakes kind of low in terms of those decisions, that is not the message that we have indirectly sent to coaches. We've told players, your season is to do with whatever you want. Coaches, this year counts. It's going on your resume. And I think there's something pretty fascinating happening in college football because of that. I think we're seeing a degree of coaching right now that's more intense than we've ever seen at any point in time, because coaches don't have the freedom that players have. Players can say, yeah, maybe I'll play, maybe I'll not, coronavirus, who knows? But the coaches have to say that what happens this year matters. It goes on my Wikipedia page. And the success that I have this year, or the success that I fail to have this year, will have a compound interest effect on me in future years. What happens now determine what's going to happen later. And by the way, you can pull yourself outside the bubble of DawgNation and see plenty of evidence of this, whether it be Ryan Day at Ohio State. He knows he's got a quarterback right now in Justin Fields, and who knows if it's ever going to be quite as good for him. Maybe one day Day wants to go to the NFL. He is coaching right now like his life depends on it. He wants to maximize his opportunity to win a national championship in an imperfect year, but maybe a perfect situation for the Buckeyes there in the Big Ten. Same thing is true for Dabo Swinney at Clemson. Now, right now, Trevor Lawrence got the coronavirus, but Lawrence is kind of like this once-in-a-generation, very special quarterback. No matter how good DJ Uiagalelei may be, with Lawrence at quarterback, with Travis Etienne at running back, this is a situation for Clemson. Who knows when it's ever quite so good again? You got a sense that Dabo Swinney is coaching like his life depends on it. He wants to try to win a national championship with this group that he has right now. Nick Saban in Alabama may be even the most, I guess, a perfect example of all of this, because he knows he's near the end of his coaching career. He's trying like mad to get a national championship. These coaches are coaching as hard as they possibly can, which obviously leads us into Georgia and Florida on Saturday. Once again, for the players who play in this game, they can come back and play again next year if they want to, or they can go on to the NFL. They can do whatever they want. Florida players have contemplated opting out. There's been less of that with Georgia, but at least in one high-profile case, Jamie Newman said, this isn't for me this year. For players, they have that freedom. But for Dan Mullen and Kirby Smart, the stakes have never been higher. This isn't a free pass year for them. This isn't a year for them to just kind of do whatever they want to do and come back and try again in 2021 when the stadium is full. That's not the way this is going. I think that both Dan Mullen and Kirby Smart feel the intense pressure that's on them. I've said this now for months and months and months, that the stakes for Georgia, Florida have never been higher, because The prevailing narrative on both sides here, one way or another, it doesn't survive this game. Georgia fans, by and large, and I've probably led this conversation, have said that because Kirby Smart is better at acquiring talent than Dan Mullen is, that gives Kirby Smart kind of a bulletproof presence in a game like this. I truly don't think that Smart can lose to Mullen until I actually see it with my own eyes. But if I do see that with my own eyes on Saturday, then clearly pushing that narrative in future years becomes more difficult to do. And on the other side of this, on the Florida side for a moment, there's this belief of, well, Dan Mullen may not be as good a recruiter, and Dan Mullen's not quite ever had the same level of talent that Kirby Smart has, but he's a better game coach, and he's an offensive mastermind. Some people at ESPN have called him the best play caller in all of college football. Well, when he's got the experienced quarterback, when he's got, seemingly everything lined up and in place for him offensively, if Georgia beats him again on Saturday with what some people have called kind of a fourth-string walk-on at quarterback and everything that Georgia's kind of dealing with for the negative, then that narrative doesn't survive for Dan Mullen either. The stakes have never been higher for Mullen and Smart. This year counts for them, even if we're in a global pandemic. And as I said before, the response to all of that, I think, is leading to somewhat unorthodox behavior. For example, at Florida, you saw what occurred on Saturday with the brawl near the end of the first half against Missouri. Kind of shocking to see the role I thought the Florida coach Dan Mullen played in all of that. It was a bizarre scene. And it's been interesting to watch the aftermath of this, where Dan Mullen himself in particular has gotten a lot of criticism for his own role in all of this. But when the official SEC statement was released yesterday after the fight between Florida and Missouri, it was a little bit of both sidesism. It was a little bit of, this is not a good look for the league in general, but no one was really singled out too much in all of this. In fact, let me read to you what the SEC said in response to this yesterday. The league statement says, there's no place in college football for the kind of incident that took place at halftime of the Missouri-Florida game on Saturday night. Everyone involved is responsible for meeting sportsmanship standards throughout each game, running onto the field to confront a game official, the gathering of teams, it says, in an on-field confrontation, and student-athletes throwing punches are all disappointing at any time, but even more so as we work to support healthy competition during a pandemic. Once again, that is the official SEC statement on all of this. So the SEC, kind of comes out and says kind of a pox on both their houses. Missouri's at fault. Florida's at fault. And, of course, we saw a handful of Missouri players get suspended. Ironically, their next game is against Georgia. The same two Florida players that we knew had kind of gotten suspended, they will miss the first half of the Georgia game coming up. And Dan Mullen is given what I'll say is only a $25,000 fine. Only given that small fine for what I thought was a pretty prominent role in creating the chaos near the halftime of the Florida-Missouri game on Saturday. And if you don't believe me that it was Mullen's fault that all of this happens, let me let you hear Hudson Mason, who admittedly is a former Georgia quarterback, but he also worked as an analyst for this game on the SEC network on Saturday. He appeared on the Paul Feinbaum show yesterday. This is his eyewitness account of how all of this played out.
I don't think it was dirty by any means, and the way Florida's offensive line responded is predictable. Nothing wrong with it. I mean, you're going to protect your quarterback. Nothing wrong. But I think when Dan Mullen came on the field is really when things started to unravel because, his intention, from what I saw, Paul, was really never to mitigate the situation. It was really never to calm it down. He came out there, and maybe he originally came out there with the hopes of trying to keep his offensive linemen from doing something stupid. Their depth is already paper thin heading into the cocktail party. But when he went out there, he really never went to his players. He went more toward the Missouri coaches. And really that kind of poured gasoline on the fire. And as a player, your coach always tells you, hey, if something happens on the field, stay on the sideline, keep your composure. But if I'm a player and I see Dan Mullen acting the way he did, it almost justifies that I can start acting like that. And so I think that was really the reason why things got so out of hand as they did.
Pretty blunt description from Hudson Mason, who, as I said, admittedly is a former Georgia quarterback, but this is a guy who I think wants to be an analyst on the SEC network and wants to be kind of a guy capable of calling any game for any team in this league. He's not holding back on his opinion there. So if what Hudson Mason says is true, then the question becomes, why would Dan Mullen act that way? Now, obviously, I can't prove what I'm about to say, but let's face it. I've never pretended to be an investigative journalist. I'm not here to tell you what I can prove. I give opinions for a living. This is my opinion. Mullen's behavior on Saturday goes back directly to what I started the show by saying. This is a year in which coaches are coaching harder than they've ever coached before. Dan Mullen right now, I think he knows that on Saturday against Georgia, it's a huge showdown for him because of how little success he's had both at Florida against Georgia, but as a head coach against Kirby Smart. Dan Mullen knows he's at risk of being exposed when he faces Georgia once again. And so I think he's doing everything he can to get his team motivated to play this game on Saturday, to change the mindset they have of being soft on defense and being doubted against Georgia and being everything else. I think Dan Mullen wants to provide some new energy, and that's what he tried to do against Missouri on Saturday. And I think Mullen placed the bet that if he goes out there and stirs up trouble, the SEC would do as it's done, which is essentially treat him softly, give him a $25,000 fine, which he's probably got between his seat cushions, and he'd sort of live on to fight another day. I think he made a pretty safe bet on that. That's exactly how it worked out. Here's my belief, and once again, you can take this with a grain of salt. You can do with this what you want. The mercy that the SEC showed to Dan Mullen by not giving him more than a punishment, not suspending him, not suspending more of the Florida players, the mercy that the SEC showed to Florida, I don't think the Gators will be quite so lucky against Georgia on Saturday. Because I think that Kirby Smart feels just as strongly as Mullen does that this is a showdown. This is about reputation. This is about pride. This is about everything else. And neither of these two teams are perfect right now. Florida's had defensive issues all year long. Georgia's had its share of offensive issues. There seems to be some controversy creeping in around the quarterback spot. Be that as it may for both sides, this is still going to be a knockdown, drag-it on Saturday, and both sides are going to do everything they can with the cards they've been dealt to find their best opportunity to win. I believe for Florida, that meant trying to change the energy in the game leading up to the Dogs. And for Georgia, I believe a lot of this is going on behind the scenes. But Florida, who wants to believe that it can get it done on Saturday, my prediction is when they get to Jacksonville and see the same version of Georgia they've now seen it for a couple of years, tough running the football, tough on defense, trying to figure out a quarterback. I think the result ends up being the same there as well. The stakes have never been higher for Georgia-Florida. It's incredibly entertaining to think about how it's going to play out, and exciting for Georgia fans to think their team may get a win once again. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Good to have you with us. Streaming video, radio, podcast, a lot of ways to get us, Facebook and YouTube and Twitter. We're on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref every day at noon. We love doing that. For those of you that like the podcast version of the show, the on-demand audio, well, it's Apple, it's Google, it's Spotify. It is everything, including posting the show at the world-famous DawgNation.com. We just really appreciate you being a part of it. And by the way, huge thanks to our friends for Engineered Solutions of Georgia for making it all possible. You know, ESOG are proud partners of UGA, which means they are, just like the rest of us, absolutely on tilt, excited about what's going to happen with the cocktail party on Saturday. And they're also a really fun company to do business with it. They've been good friends of ours here at DawgNation Daily for a long time, and let's face it, you know, we just came off a bunch of storms last week. I hate that. Some of you are still without power, and we hope you get that restored very soon. But for others of you, you've noticed that water that creeps into your basement or garage, something like that, after a storm like this hits. Please don't put that off getting fixed. Or for those of you who've maybe seen something that could even be a more substantial problem, like the horizontal cracks that show up in your foundation, that could be a sign that something needs to be done. Well, ESOG, my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia, are the ones to trust to get it done for you. They got 2 full-time engineers on staff, super smart people to solve your problem, maybe one of the biggest you could face as a homeowner. Easy to get in touch with. Give them a call, 678-ESOG-NOW. That's 678-ESOG-NOW. That'll get you in touch with my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. All right, I'm going to have Connor Riley coming up in just a moment. He was a part of the Georgia media experience yesterday, hearing from Georgia players and Georgia coach Kirby Smart on the Dogs' preparation for the cocktail party. But before I bring on Connor, let me do a little bit more on the Georgia side of this for a moment as we go around the doghouse delivered today by our friends at Marco's Pizza. So here's what I said a moment ago, that for coaches this year, they are coaching as if this was a year like any year, and in some cases maybe even more intense because of the stakes that are in place for some of the key rivalry games, Georgia-Florida included. This isn't a free pass year for them the way that it is for players. So if we see examples of what might be Dan Mullen, you know, trying to put on a tough face and be Mr. Tough Guy and get his team fired up, try to cast himself as something that he's never quite been before. If we think that's true for him, then I think we should look for some evidence from the Georgia side as well that Georgia's going to do whatever it can to win this game on Saturday, which obviously brings us to what has been the hot topic now for a while, the quarterback situation. The fact that even after a couple of interceptions on Saturday, Georgia seems content to stay with Stetson Bennett at quarterback. This after the questions that linger about, well, how healthy is JT Daniels and the rumors that have popped up about maybe Dwan Mathis might consider transferring. Georgia, through all of this, is seemingly just as committed to Stetson Bennett as it ever has been before. Kirby Smart and Todd Monken and everybody else. And I think that's an interesting place to start when we think about Georgia's preparations for the Gators on Saturday. First of all, more consideration for JT Daniels. What's up with Dwan Mathis? Kirby Smart did talk about that some yesterday. Here's what he said.
The only physical limitations are still, would be coming off the knee, which he hasn't shown a lot of ailments coming off the knee. I mean, he's been out of the brace. He's been able to throw the ball. He's done a good job. He actually comes down and throws on the scout team and competes and does a really nice job down there with us. Again, the decisions we make as coaches are decisions we have to make. They're tough decisions, no different than they are at who plays corner and who plays tackle. And there's a lot of really good competitions out there going on. And ultimately, we feel like Stetson gives us the best chance to win right now. And, Dwan gets a lot of work, a lot of reps. He probably doesn't get as many opportunities as Stetson does and Dwan does because he works down there with us some on the scout. At the end of the day, guys, the decision has to be made by us. It gives us the best chance to win. We do that based on the total body of work, and those are decisions that have to be made.
All right, let me push Dwan Mathis to the side for a moment and speak only about JT Daniels. So what Smart says there is very similar to something that he said in a press conference a couple of weeks ago when he talked about Daniels not playing as a football choice, that right now we believe that Stetson Bennett gives us the best chance to win. And in comments a couple of weeks ago, it had been the first press conference right after the Alabama game, Smart's statement was nothing related to Daniels being hurt in any form or fashion. And we came on the show that next day, started the show by saying, listen to Kirby Smart here. He's not citing health as a reason that JT Daniels isn't playing. Then lo and behold, the next day, Smart spoke again and did cite health as a reason that JT Daniels wasn't playing. There's a very good chance the same pattern plays itself out again. Smart there talks about this as a football decision and later on opens the door for health to creep back in on all of this. It's just been kind of that maddening, Mr. Toad's wild ride of twists and turns when it comes to how Kirby Smart has spoken about JT Daniels. At this point in time, I don't even know what to make of any of it other than the fact that my assumption is that JT Daniels is just not about to start playing for UGA. Then we get to the Dwan Mathis part of this. A lot of Georgia fans have said, well, if you trusted Mathis to start week one, then you jerked him out pretty quick. Does he not deserve more of a look, considering the fact that at one point in time you thought of him as being worthy of playing time? Why is the leash longer for Stetson Bennett now than it was for Dwan Mathis then? And then lo and behold, there's all these rumors that pop up of, well, maybe Dwan Mathis is so frustrated about all of this, he's just considering the possibility that he might transfer. Smart also dealt with that head on yesterday about what his conversations have been like with Dwan Mathis over the course of the last few days. Here is Smart on another one of his quarterbacks.
I talked to him, before practice. I talked to him for a while, and we kind of visit each week with the quarterbacks to keep them updated on where things are.
Where's his head right now?
He wants to play. He's a competitor. He wants an opportunity to get in and compete, and we gave he and JT a lot of reps during the off week, and we'll continue to give as many guys as we can get ready reps to grow those guys and get them ready to play.
I think it's interesting that Smart doesn't downplay the idea that Mathis is eager for more of an opportunity. In some cases, you could see Smart saying, oh, he's fine. He's a team player, blah, blah, blah. It's not exactly what Smart says there. I take that to probably mean something. But ultimately, though, I think we're kind of right back in the same spot we've always been, at least over the course of the last few weeks. That no matter how much some Georgia fans may argue for giving Daniels a chance, even if he's not quite as mobile as maybe he otherwise would be, or giving Dwan Mathis more of a chance, that's simply not what this Georgia coaching staff is going to do right now. And you can chalk it up to stubbornness, you can chalk it up to whatever else, but if Dan Mullen is coaching like his life depends on it against Georgia on Saturday, then the assumption that you should make is that Kirby Smart's ready to go into Jacksonville and do the exact same thing. With his life depending on his coaching reputation for now depending on that, it seems like Smart is casting his bet with Stetson Bennett. That is not a passive decision that he's choosing to make. This, I would say, is what Smart truly does think gives his team the best chance to win. and we will all sit back and watch and figure out what those results end up being. It's Around the Doghouse. It's delivered today by our friends at Marco's Pizza, America's most beloved pizza because it's real, authentic pizza made the Italian way. Many of you are going to be settling in watching a lot of TV tonight. Some of you not watching sports. Well, whatever you're watching on the tube this evening, Marco's Pizza pairs well with it. You can also get great savings as well. Marco's got great specialty pizzas, all kinds of different, pizzas with great toppings, things like that. You can get a large white cheesy right now. That's an example of one of the specialties they have, as well as a large 2-topping pizza for just $23.99. Really, any of the specialty pizzas, along with that large 2-topping pizza, is $23.99 right now. You can go to Marco's app for delivery on that, marcos.com. Easy to order, great tasting pizza at a great price. Who wouldn't love that? Our friends at Marco's Pizza deliver Around the Doghouse to you here today. All right. Later on, we're going to look at what one of, I think, the major on-field football questions related to this game is on Saturday, and it has nothing to do with who's going to be playing quarterback for Georgia. We'll address that before we're done today. But for now, on everything that happened in Athens yesterday and the mindset around UGA as it plays what I think is inarguably the biggest game it'll play all season long, at least in the regular season. Let's talk more about that with Connor Riley here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We'll say hello to Connor Riley doing double duty for us, producing our show, but also speaking with us as a guest here after doing a lot with the Dogs yesterday in Athens. And, Connor, as I bring you in, I'll repeat a point that I've made on today's show, but also been making for months now. That there are dominant narratives surrounding the Georgia program in comparison to Florida and the Florida program in comparison to Georgia. The one point that everyone has to stipulate as a fact is that Kirby Smart is better at acquiring talent than Dan Mullen does. Mullen kind of goes on the transfer market to make up the gap on that sum, but Mullen has never been, even at a place like Florida that conceivably has similar resources to Georgia, he's never recruited as well. So Georgia fans take that to mean that Smart is a better program builder than Mullen, and therefore Dan Mullen and Florida aren't the same threat to Georgia that a program like Alabama might be. However, the Florida side of this has been Kirby Smart may be great at recruiting, but he's not developing those players as well as he could. He's not as good a game coach as Dan Mullen. He's certainly not as good as orchestrating an offense. And that's the prevailing narrative that exists around Florida. One way or another, the notion that Smart is bulletproof against Mullen, or the notion that Mullen is a better game coach and will eventually exploit that advantage against Smart. One way or another, I don't think those two narratives for the loser of this game can survive past Saturday. It's why I believe the stakes of Georgia-Florida have never been higher than they will be this weekend. What are your thoughts on the game?
Yeah, it's two people with very different ideologies. We spend a lot of time talking about this, and at this time of the year, it all sort of comes together, and we have sort of a decision day on Saturday to
I see what you're doing. I see what you're doing here.
To see how things play out. Kirby Smart and Dan Mullen could not be farther apart in how they choose to, I think, interact, behave. I think of Smart as usually a pretty good PR manager, whereas Dan Mullen the past couple of weeks has shown he is anything but that, and if anything, he wants to stoke the flames. And this Saturday, as you point out, the stakes have never been higher. It's a game that I think is going to say both a lot about Smart and Mullen. I think if a Georgia wins on Saturday, it's going to say a lot about Kirby Smart, I think, as a game coach, because I don't necessarily always believe he gets enough credit for all the stuff he does very well besides, I would say, the quarterback position. And if Mullen wins, it's a big feather in his cap, and he answers some of the major questions he's always had about him is, well, can he beat teams with elite talent? And, your point about the stakes have never been higher, like every time this year, Georgia could have a combination of Joe Burrow and Cam Newton at quarterback. It could be the greatest team of all time. And you being a longtime Georgia fan, I being a longtime Georgia supporter, watcher, whatever you want to call it, there's always sort of a feeling of dread that rolls around this week because we've seen enough of these games to know weird stuff happens in this rivalry. Someone's going to make a big play who didn't think they'd be that type of player. Last year was Lawrence Cager for Georgia. This year, we're going to find out who that's going to be on Saturday, whether on the Georgia sideline or the Florida sideline.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And, maybe your opinion's different than mine. I'm not saying that Mullen's actions on Saturday were totally calculated, but I certainly believe that he saw the value in trying to spark a new emotion in his team. And if that's true, I think it's interesting that Smart's tact at Georgia seems to be almost the exact opposite. Whereas Smart seems to want to lean on a quiet confidence of Georgia doing things the way they have the last couple of years, even if it kind of annoys some Georgia fans. Smart's content to kind of, just stay the way that he has been, where it seems like Dan Mullen is trying to find a new energy. Now, someone like me who doesn't like Dan Mullen would say this is him being a totally phony and trying to put literally putting on a costume. He obviously did for his post-game press conference in embarrassing fashion. But, even figuratively speaking, it's him trying to put on his daddy's clothes here and try to be something that he's not. I mean, I guess you can take that however you want to.
I guess my first question for you, you are a huge Star Wars fan.
I am.
Love the franchise.
Yeah.
How disappointed were you to see that Dan Mullen, also apparently a big Star Wars fan and dressed up as Darth Vader?
Yeah, I mean, pretty disappointed. I mean, listen, Star Wars is kind of a cultural phenomenon. I assume that Mullen had seen the movies, but the fact that he sees himself as Darth Vader, I think is pretty funny here. I would say that Mullen is a lot more likely someone from, like, Episode 8 or one of the first 3 movies, the movies that are, pretty universally considered as terrible. If Mullen is a Star Wars character, he's someone from The Last Jedi. He ain't somebody from Return of the Jedi.
All right. I think back to 2007, and, Mullen is pretty clearly a guy who will do unconventional things to sort of rile up his team. I do admittedly find it interesting why you needed to rile up your team against a team like Missouri at home when it's your first time playing in 3 weeks. I find that a little bit interesting, and why you need to incite a full-on brawl to do that. But you look at the way Urban Meyer ran that Florida program, ignore the obvious off-field issues that they had there. It's sort of that, like you say, the quiet confidence that, hey, we know how good we are. We know we're just better than every team. We're going to line up just about every Saturday. Mullen, on the other hand, he likes to pull stunts. I wonder if we see something like we did in 2007 this weekend, where 2 pretty talented teams meet on the field. The admittedly more talented team probably has some questions about it. And if Mullen might try to do something similar to what Mark Richt did when Georgia scored the first touchdown in 2007 and had the team storm the field to sort of rile up the energy in the game.
So it's funny that you say that. I actually said the Florida-Missouri brawl was the 2007 celebration. I'll be very candid about this. You weren't here when I said this the other day. For the people who may have missed that as well, I'll say it again. When the celebration after the first touchdown in 2007 happened, I loved it. Fired me up. I thought it initially got Florida off its game plan. For the most part, in that game, in that moment, it worked. And yet years later, even weeks later, it was obvious it was probably not the right thing to do. And I think the SEC was pretty upset with Mark Richt for having done that. It's one of those things that seemed like a good thing to do at the moment. After the fact, it was probably universally accepted that that's the kind of thing that can not be done. Again, it was whatever else. I think the Florida-Missouri brawl was that version of this of, I think that Dan Mullen, either because of the coronavirus layoff or because of the struggles on defense or because of the fact that it's all of a sudden not Georgia with the losing streak against Florida, it's Florida the losing streak against Georgia, they needed that new energy, and that's where they sought to obtain it. During a halftime of Missouri leading into the Georgia game, that was attempted to be their rallying point. And I think similarly, it'll eventually be viewed as the bad idea that it was, because I think that kind of, people on the message boards like to call it fake juice sometimes. That kind of fake juice just doesn't last very long.
Yeah, and I don't know if you can have fake juice against a Georgia team that pretty clearly I think is very motivated or wants to win. I know everyone wasn't thrilled with how they looked on Saturday, but driving in today thinking about it, Georgia and Kentucky, ideologically, they want to play similar. They want to win on the lines of scrimmage. And I think Georgia against Kentucky these last couple of years, you've seen, they just know that they don't have to do anything fancy. They're just going to line up, run the football, overpower a powerful but not quite as powerful Kentucky team. And it's never really going to be pretty, I think, when those two teams play. And yes, Stetson Bennett didn't play great on Saturday, but I wouldn't be surprised, given last year, even you look at last year, Jake Fromm, how he played in that game. He came out and played great, and we never saw that Jake Fromm again. Weird things happen in this rivalry, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Stetson Bennett play really well on Saturday.
Yeah, listen, I said this yesterday, that a lot of Georgia fans have seemingly forgotten that the narrative that they're pushing regarding Stetson Bennett this year is exactly what it was related to Jake Fromm a year ago. I even put the numbers side by side that, so many of the offensive issues that Georgia seemingly has now existed in the exact same way last year. If anything, they're a little bit better right now. Georgia's scoring about 3 points per game against Power 5 competition more, which is all they played this season, than the 5 Power Power 5 opponents they played prior to last year's game. Stetson Bennett's thrown more touchdowns than Jake Fromm. He's thrown for a higher yards per attempt. Even on Saturday, he was 10-plus yards per attempt against Kentucky in a game that most people said that he played bad. The only thing that Stetson Bennett has been worse at than Jake Fromm is he's thrown more interceptions. And obviously that's the thing that Fromm, against Dan Mullen teams in 2018, 2019, he completely avoided. There were no interceptions in those games. Fromm did throw one interception, the 42-7 win back in 2017. So here's the question, we'll get to and kind of get into some football stuff here for a moment. Do you think that you can get the good of Stetson Bennett? And he's made some bigger throws than some people have given him credit for. Do you think you can get the good of Stetson Bennett with also avoiding some of these interceptions? Because if he goes out and throws picks against Florida, the way that he has against everybody else, then my belief that Georgia wins this game, it becomes a lot harder to get that done. It just does. So, can Bennett be a game manager? He's not a game manager now. He makes some good throws, makes some bad throws. He's not really managing the game. But if he is a game manager on Saturday, I believe Georgia can win. I'm just not quite so sure that Bennett can be careful enough with the football to do that.
We've seen him do it against Auburn and Tennessee. So at the very least, you have to say that he's done it before and that he could theoretically do it again. The last two games, however, he's made, and you've talked about this in the offseason about, how some interceptions are okay. Yeah. The interceptions specifically against Kentucky are the types of interceptions that aren't okay.
Totally.
Turnover in the red zone, and then the second interception just chucking it downfield into contested coverage, and whatever happened on the play happened. But the reality is, those are the types of interceptions that he can't make. Now, he's in all likelihood, I think, gonna get George Pickens back this week. The Georgia offensive line and running game, which I wrote about today, it's the best they've looked all year. They've gotten better in every single game, and with Florida not having Zachary Carter on the field, or at least for the first half on Saturday, I think that's advantaged Georgia there.
Important piece.
I expect another strong running game from Georgia this week. But at the end of the day, Stetson Bennett is going to have to make plays. And more importantly, he's going to have to not turn the ball over. Going into that Kentucky game, I said that the thing to watch for with him, I never expected him to throw for a ton of yards or throw a lot of touchdowns in that game because Kentucky's secondary is pretty good. And I might even say better than Florida's. But he can't make those turnovers, and that's what he did against Kentucky, and ultimately that's what's going to determine the outcome of Saturday's game.
Kind of lost the structure of the interview here for a moment. I want to address something here. So Georgia is favored in this game. They're not just favored; they're favored above a key number of 3.5. 3 being a key number. Georgia's been favored by at least 3.5 all week. In some houses, they've been even favored more than that, which flies in the face of some Georgia fans. And by the way, our DawgNation postgame show on Saturday was a lot of this. A lot of Georgia fans just simply don't think Georgia's going to win because they've seen some problems for UGA. So as someone like yourself who kind of comes to this from a little bit of an analytical bent, talk to my Georgia fans out there who don't believe Georgia's going to win. Explain to them why Georgia is favored, even though conceivably the team they'd have a bias in favor of, they seem to doubt. Why does Vegas like Georgia against Florida on Saturday?
Georgia has signed 7 more 5-star prospects and 12 more 4-star prospects. And at the end of the day, I think that's what it comes down to. And thinking about this today, the way I sort of think about in terms of games, opposing offenses, is how many players on the other team would come and start for Georgia? Yeah. And you look at this week, obviously the defense is banged up. No Julian Rochester, no Richard LeCount. We're probably going to see Lewis Seen. We're probably going to see Quay Walker. And still up in the air on Jordan Davis. I'd be surprised if he plays, but stranger things have happened. You take all that into account, I still don't know if there's anyone on this Florida defense that would start for Georgia's defense on Saturday and what that is going to look like. Now, Florida's offense does have some players, and specifically, I know everyone is going to talk about Kyle Pitts and the matchup problems he presents. The guy I'm more interested in seeing how Georgia goes about defending is Kadarius Toney, because I think the speed of Jalen Waddle gave Georgia a lot more problems than necessarily what Devontae Smith did. And I think Toney's speed is a bigger worry and concern for me than what Pitts might be able to do as a tight end. Because while, yes, not having LeCount hurts, and you even saw last year, LeCount had a 4th down pass breakup against Kyle Pitts.
Yep.
I think Mark Webb, who's a high school teammate of Pitts, Tyreek Stevenson, Lewis Seen, Christopher Smith, who I'm going to have a story on later this week, those are bodies that they can throw at that problem. And I think those guys are, for the most part, athletic enough to match up with him. How Georgia goes about defending Toney is, to me, the most interesting part of this game.
I'm glad you're writing about Christopher Smith, because I do think that Smith's story is actually pretty amazing. People kind of talk about the underdog story of a guy like Stetson Bennett even becoming the Georgia quarterback. I'm sure that there's a way of viewing the Smith thing as kind of the same way. We did some great interviews with Smith back when he was still a recruit, and this was a guy who had plenty of people that kind of doubted him because of the high school that he came from, the fact that he wasn't particularly big, and that's always been a massive motivating factor for him. In fact, I remember talking to Smith January of, like right as he was getting ready to come to Georgia. I forget if he'd already enrolled or not. I can't quite remember. But he'd gained like 10, 15 pounds. I mean, he just like works out back then. I'm sure it's continued now. Kind of just works out all the time because he wanted to prove to people he's good enough to play at Georgia, because a lot of people said you're too small to do this. So when you're thinking about like the amazing stories of, kind of who does what and who's overcoming the odds, the fact that Chris Smith is a trusted safety for Georgia right now, I don't think that Georgia has any problem putting him on the field on Saturday. That in itself is kind of a cool underdog story. The fact that Smith always believed he could play at Georgia, and now he's ready to show everybody else.
Yeah, two things on that. You look back at that 2018 class early on. Obviously, he finishes as the number 1 ranked class in the country, but a lot of those early commitments in that class ended up not signing, getting processed, whatever you want to say about that class. Smith was really the only one of those guys that committed early on that stuck with Georgia and stayed with them throughout the process. And then going into Saturday, obviously there's going to be a lot of questions about him. Obviously, he's not Richard LeCounte, who I thought maybe played the best game of his career this past Saturday against Kentucky.
He was good.
But Smith has played a lot this year. He played the entire second half against Auburn when LeCounte was out with targeting. He played most of the 3 quarters on Saturday because of a Lewis Seen injury. So
yeah, I don't think Georgia flinches about putting him in.
They trust him. They've liked what they've seen out of him a lot in practice this year. He's a guy who's gotten better every single week, and I'm not saying he's going to be Richard LeCounte, and obviously he's going to have to make up and fill some big shoes, but I think Smith is going to be up to the task and be capable of making a play or two on Saturday for Georgia.
Let me ask you a question. This is probably a dumb question, but I'm kind of intentionally asking it that way. I got no problem with Smith being on the field, and I'm happy to hear that Lewis Sing's probably healthy enough to play. But does Georgia need safeties against Florida? I mean, you're going to guard Pitts with probably a cornerback, anyway. Florida does not run the ball particularly well, which is one of the reasons why you would favor safeties over corners in some situations. From an X's and O's standpoint, how much does Georgia even really need safeties in this game?
That's maybe the Tony thing in there. How do they go about defending him, and how does Florida use him to potentially stretch the field? It's one of those things with LeCounte, especially with the way Georgia's safeties have played in recent years, where they're not, and LeCounte's maybe a little bit different this year, but they're not necessarily the playmaking type safeties. They're that we're not going to give up big play safeties, and I certainly think Smith fits into that category. So they might ask Lewis Seen, who is a little bit hobbled with an ankle injury right now, to be a little bit more of that playmaker on the back end. But Tyreek Stevenson is a guy who's played a lot. He played a lot in last year's game. I would not be surprised to see him take on a bigger role in Georgia's defense on Saturday. And I think you're going to see DJ Daniel.
Yeah.
They still have their cornerbacks in Stokes and Campbell. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Campbell line up a little bit against Pitts, given the success Campbell had against a big-bodied receiver like Seth Williams from Auburn. They've got a lot of solutions to throw at the problems Florida's offense presents.
I guess that's the point I'm kind of getting to is when you think about the guys that can play cornerback for Georgia, some of them are so versatile. Webb's physical as he can be. He loves to play the run. Tyson Campbell's got a little beef to him. Now, he runs really well, but he's got a little beef to him. So many of the cornerbacks that Georgia can play, like if you're in kind of like almost like a dime style, look with your cornerbacks. I mean, a couple of those guys are pretty close to being, Tyreek Stevenson's no small guy. A couple of those guys are fairly close to being safeties as it is.
Right, and the big question, and I know you're going to get to this, so I don't want to step on it too much, but can Florida run the ball? Jordan Davis, I said all season, I think he's the one guy that's the most irreplaceable on Georgia's defense.
Totally agree.
And, he might not be out there. They lose Julian Rochester. He's not going to be out there. But Florida's not a good rushing team. They have not been that under Dan Mullen there. And if there were ever a week for it to come together for them, it would seem to be this week. But even when Davis went out last week, other than that one drive, the drive he ironically went out on, I thought they did a pretty good job slowing down Kentucky's run game. And Kentucky has a much better rushing attack than what Florida does. So if Jalen Carter, if Devontae Wyatt, if those guys play like they did against Kentucky, I think that's going to be good enough for Georgia to stay in this game defensively and ultimately win it.
And keep this in mind, y'all. It all comes back to recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
Connor mentions Jalen Carter. Warren Brinson will play a bigger role on Saturday than he's played before. These are head-to-head wins that Georgia got in the state of Florida for defensive linemen that Florida won. In the case of Warren Brinson, one of the classic troll jobs of all time. And all of a sudden, he gets a bigger opportunity against the team that he spurned. This is why I like Georgia in the game. I agree with Connor's take that I'm not sure that anybody that starts for Florida would also start for Georgia. And the depth that Georgia gets to put on display on Saturday is another thing to be glad you're cheering for the team in red and black, not the team in orange and blue. Not to say that Florida can't do anything to challenge Georgia. As Connor said, if you want to get me nervous about a game, take away those three guys up the middle for Georgia. Take away Davis. Right now, Monty Rice is not 100%, I don't believe. And obviously, Richard LeCount's going to miss the game. All of a sudden, those are the three most pivotal players I think that Georgia has. Two of them, one of them is definitely not playing. One of them, I would say, is unlikely to play. One of them is probably not 100%. But it's just another chance for Georgia to kind of show off the depth that they have.
One interesting thing here, I was digging through some numbers, looking at some stuff. You know who leads the SEC in sacks right now?
Is it Aziz?
Well, individually, yes, but as a team.
Who is that?
It is the Georgia Bulldogs.
How about that? Good for them. I haven't seen that stat in a while.
I believe they are the only team averaging over 3 sacks a game in SEC play.
Yeah.
Florida's offensive line still not great. They have not recruited well enough there. I wouldn't be surprised if Azeez Ojulari, who had a sack last year, if Adam Anderson, if Nolan Smith, if those guys have a big game on Saturday. And that, I think most importantly, would go a long way in securing a Georgia victory, because ultimately I believe the reason that the defense wore out against Alabama was just because they could not get to the pass rusher in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, exactly right. And this is obviously a very different Florida offensive line compared to the behemoths that Alabama starts there. It's a kitchen sink game. It's what you throw everything out there. You hope you can find enough to get it done. Obviously, I love talking trash to the Gators, and I truly am confident that Georgia wins. But it's going to take a lot to get it done, and the injury situation that Georgia deal with certainly does not make it easier. Connor, thanks for your thoughts on all of this. We will look forward to a chat with you down the line and reading more from you at DawgNation.com here this week.
Yep, as always, it was a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, incredible stuff. We are going to talk more about how the specific injuries that Georgia has impacts the situation for Florida on Saturday, because I do think it brings back to mind a pretty stubborn version of Dan Mullen from a year ago. It'll be interesting to see how this either replicates itself or does in the game on Saturday. Stick with me for a couple of minutes, and we will do that today before we're done. But before that, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, I want to look at some of the other big games of the weekend here. I want to do this from a point spread perspective. We call this our My Bookie Best Bets. I'll give you the spreads for the game that matter on Saturday, and really one pretty big one on Friday as well. We'll roll through these for the next couple of minutes. Obviously, Georgia-Florida is the big one. Georgia is a 3.5-point favorite here. Let me give you one kind of like gambling nerd type thing, and we'll kind of move on. Generically speaking, and you can do research on this and find this for yourself, Team A versus Team B, take the names off of it, generically speaking. There's actually a illogical thing that plays out with numbers at 3.5 and 2.5. You would think that when a team is favored by 2.5 points, that they, would perform one way against the spread, or a team that's favored by 3.5, that a half point might get them in trouble and they might lose more often than they win. But the truth is the opposite's true. That if you look at generically speaking across the board in college football, and there's research out there on this, the teams favored by 3.5 points end up covering the spread more than 50% of the time, and teams favored by favored by 2.5 points end up covering the spread less than 50% of the time. All of a sudden, that half point kind of working the opposite of the way that you might think. Some of that research is out there. Other games that matter on Saturday: Mississippi State, fresh off getting shut out by Vanderbilt. I should say Mississippi State, fresh off getting shut out by Alabama, hosts Vanderbilt on Saturday. Bulldogs, a 19.5-point favorite here. They are a total mess. Kylan Hill, his absence has never quite been explained there. He's not the only one missing, and Leach coming off a shutout. Of course, Vanderbilt's the worst team in the SEC. This is not a very fun game to watch. I do think Texas A&M and South Carolina could be a lot of fun to pay attention to, though. Gamecocks, 10-point home underdogs there. A&M has been rolling here. They've got their sights set on the potential of a 9-1 season with a much easier schedule here the rest of the way. This is I don't want to say rivalry, but these two teams do play each other every year. So there's a little bit of history between the Aggies and the Gamecocks there. In fact, I think they even play for a trophy of some kind, something to do with Davy Crockett or something like that. That's certainly one worth paying attention to. Let's roll on and look at the rest of our games here as part of our My Bookie Best Bets. As said before, Gamecocks getting 10 points there. Tennessee at Arkansas on Saturday. The Razorbacks have been great against the spread all year long. They covered last week, kind of late backdoor style against Texas A&M. The Vols are a little bit of a reeling program, coming off a very bad loss to Alabama, at least in terms of the final margin here. Tennessee needs to play better, but Arkansas is a dangerous opponent. Arkansas is just kind of hanging around all year long. I kind of joked last week that I was selling high on the Razorbacks after touting them a good bit. But they even hung around, kept it close, at least closer than the experts would have thought, against Texas A&M. So that's a pretty fun game to watch. Of course, outside the SEC on Friday night, BYU, who kind of fashions itself as the best non-Power 5 conference team in the country, get a chance to prove that on the blue turf of Boise. The home Broncos are 3-point underdogs here. That is a very fun game on Friday night. BYU's actually proven itself to be a pretty good team, but this is probably the stiffest remaining test they have. Clemson goes to Notre Dame. Irish getting 5.5 at home. Also getting the benefit of no Trevor Lawrence, but I'm not quite so sure how much of a blessing that is given the way that DJ Uiagalelei played for the Tigers last week in propelling a comeback against Boston College. Biggest ACC game we've had in a number of years. Certainly the biggest regular season test that Clemson's faced, probably since a previous matchup with Notre Dame, with apologies to Texas A&M, the last couple of years. This is actually a game very much worth watching. No snark from me on this whatsoever, as both of these teams, regardless of the outcome on Saturday, want to keep their names in the college football playoff conversation. That's something else to think about there. And, of course, as a part of our MyBookie Best Bets, I'll also mention the over-under for Georgia and Florida at 53.5. This is a big advancement from Georgia from where it was a week ago when they did not go over against Kentucky. More points expected here, obviously because of the high-powered Florida offense. And, of course, for all of these games and all of those lines, we'll make our picks on those this week as part of our Go With The Flow presented by R.S. Andrews. It comes up Friday on the DawgNation video channels, but if you want to get your own expertise down and make some money on your knowledge of college football, the best way for you to do that is to take advantage of winning season at MyBookie. You can find MyBookie online. Just simply type it into your browser. Then after that, use the promo code DawgNation. You can get a big first deposit bonus up to $1,000. You can get your first deposit doubled. It's what MyBookie does for you. They make you a winner before you even place your first bet. Then after that, with more money in your account, the big deposit bonus acting as an incentive, you simply play, you win, you get paid. College football, pro football, everything else kind of going on right now. You can take advantage of all of it at MyBookie. Find MyBookie online, use the promo code DawgNation, and you're in to win after that, and best of luck with your picks here this weekend. All right, with that said, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, let's turn our attention now back fully to Georgia and Florida on Saturday. And I think one of the key storylines here, and one of the reasons why I've just not put Florida in the category of a team like Alabama, who will be a real threat to Georgia every time they play, or a team like LSU a year ago, who's a real threat to Georgia each and every time they play. When you think about what Joe Burrow did for LSU. But let's face it, you also had Clyde Edwards-Helaire to deal with, and he had 1,400 yards rushing. You think about the challenge of facing Mac Jones in Alabama right now, but Najee Harris is a load, had more than 30 carries when Georgia played them a couple of weeks ago. But it's not just the high-powered offense, it's also the presence of a dominant running game, too. And the more you are worried about the passing attack, the more the rushing attack steps up and has a chance to beat you. We've seen this over and over again. That's what makes teams like that truly dangerous, teams that are truly great. Florida, though, has not been that team. Florida, in fact, Gators coach Dan Mullen last year essentially abandoned the run against the Dogs, didn't try to run the football at all, and was pretty stubborn in his post-game press conference, essentially shrugging off the notion that you've got to run to win in the SEC. This is Dan Mullen from a year ago.
Coach, they do anything special to stop you guys in the run game? You really had nothing on the ground today.
No. I didn't do anything to me. We fell behind. We wanted to take the lead. We fell behind early. And so we were throwing a little bit more. The goal was to try to take the lead. I think, they scored that touchdown to take the lead was a big, I think that was the biggest play of the game right there. Right? I think we thought we were off the field on third down and they got sent back on.
Does it make it harder to call plays though when the run game is?
We didn't. I don't think we tried to call many run game plays, to be honest with you. I don't think they did. And then when we ran the ball, P. Ryan had 7 carries, 31 yards. Right? Pierce, 3 for 13, right? I don't know, 10 for 44 for the running backs. We just didn't run the ball much.
Now, part of the tone of voice there from Dan Mullen is the fact that he's pouty and petulant because his team had lost the game. But can you imagine an SEC coach saying, we didn't really try to run the ball? And I've been the first to say that passing game is more important than in big SEC games, big college football games than it used to be, because the sport's taken on a little bit more of a look that the NFL has kind of made, more prominent, more, whatever else. When Georgia plays a team like Alabama, they've got to be able to throw the ball to be able to win in a game like that. But the big reason why I don't put Florida in that category is because of what you've heard from Dan Mullen right there. Against Georgia last season, was content to try to throw it on every single down, which gave Georgia a chance to do some of the things it wants to do. Georgia has been the more physical team by a long shot in comparison to Florida. Better defense, better running game means the advantage that a team like Florida might have with its passing game simply doesn't come to full fruition because Georgia is exploiting its own advantages. And here we head towards Saturday, where once again, the kind of shrugged shoulders of, maybe we'll try to run it, maybe we won't. Statistically speaking, that's showing up for Florida once again. They're just ninth in the SEC right now in rushing yards per game at 133.75. Not a very good running team, despite the fact they're scoring a lot of points. They are content, once again, to do it simply through the air. But if that's their recipe to try to beat Georgia on Saturday, it's going to be a disaster, and Mullen's own fans, Florida fans, will be the one to call him out on this after the game. You can't completely abandon any idea of running the football against a team like Georgia because Georgia's defensive backs are so good, they'll just drop back in coverage and they'll find a way to get enough done to give themselves a chance to win, leaning on the physicality advantage they have on both lines of scrimmage. That's just simply the way this game is going to play out. But admittedly, as Connor Riley and I were just talking about a moment ago, that the physicality advantage that Georgia has enjoyed is threatened a little bit this week. I think it's probably more likely than not that Jordan Davis doesn't play. The internet chatter is, despite what Kirby Smart has said, Davis won't. We know Julian Rochester's not going to play, and I kind of gave you the baseball analogy yesterday of being strong up the middle. When your nose guard is in trouble, when your inside linebacker Monty Rice, who is, I would say right now, probably not 100%, at least hasn't been, and Richard LeCounte's missing from the game, in a normal SEC situation, that opened up the door for Florida to at least try to run it on Saturday. But I simply don't know if Mullen has the will to do that or if these Gators have the toughness to do that. But that is one of the major storylines for how this game's going to play out on Saturday. Can Florida act like an SEC team, or do they know going in they're simply not as tough as Georgia? So I can't fully give you all the details on this as of yet. But boy, I am excited about something I'm going to be able to announce this week. You know, it's a very different version of the cocktail party this year, but we're going to try to step up and serve people anyway who can't have the full-on cocktail experience like they want to have. This is going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to tell you more about that. Probably full details hopefully tomorrow. Your chance to really be involved here and hopefully have some fun, even if we have to kind of do this from sort of a virtual standpoint here this week. We'll tell you more about that a little bit later on. Obviously, you know what's at stake on Saturday. We've done our part to try to provide the narrative for all of it. It's been a long time since Florida's beaten Georgia. And Georgia's not a perfect team right now. There's issues at quarterback. There's a need for more high-powered offense. But the ability to fix those things made better from a position of strength, which means you want to see that Gatorade or Updater continue to climb. Here's that number for today, 1,466 days. We'll see you tomorrow on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Hopefully we'll have no technical glitch. We had a little bit of an issue in the cool down yesterday, but I understand that everything's kind of all squared away on that front today, so we should be good to go. And I guess the next time, if that ever happens again where that screen kind of goes berserk, it sounds like y'all could hear me just fine, so we may just throw up a graphic on the screen to keep that from being a distraction, and then continue to take some of your comments, kind of audio only at that point in time. All right, couple comments here. By the way, check out R.S. Andrews. I mentioned the R.S. Andrews Go With The Flow on Fridays. You can check that on the DawgNation video channel, but also check out R.S. Andrews for all your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. You know, heat's on at my house at night, and if you haven't turned yours on yet, well, when you get ready to, I'm sure you're nervous. Is it going to work the way it's supposed to? Well, if you've got any concerns about that, R.S. Andrews will take good care of you. You'll get your system tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Find them online at rsandrews.com. Robert Barnes says Kentucky is strong on the lines, but it was a street fight for us last week. We took them down and broke them down. Yeah. I mean, from a physicality standpoint, you know, emerging in that game does prepare Georgia okay for what's going to happen on Saturday. Tavedas Taylor says, when was the last time the UGA offense won a game? It's been a while. Georgia's got some offensive problems. If you want to ask it, you know, literally and try to get a literal answer, I guess the last time the Georgia offense won a game for the team, is it Rose Bowl 28. I mean, is the Rose Bowl? Was that the last time the Georgia offense was the reason the team won a game? You know, you could certainly say, you know, rushing attack helped you beat Kentucky in 2018, but obviously defense is a big part of that too. It's a fair question. I mean, you know, Georgia's trying to find that element. Georgia's got a lot going for it, but that true, full, high-powered offense that just dejects a team. You know, I'm from the 80s, and that's the era I grew up in as a child. I was a high schooler in the 90s, child in the 80s. But back, you know, now in the NBA, everybody shoots threes every single time. But back then, you really only had a couple guys on each team that shot a three. And for some reason, a three-point shot just seemed like the biggest deal in the world because they weren't coming with regularity. All five guys on the floor on a lot of teams, you know, shoot threes pretty commonly now. You know, but back then, you know, if somebody connected on a big three, it was just deflating for the other team. I think that big-time explosive plays on offense have the same kind of effect on an opposing team in college football now, that when you hit the 45-yard passing play, not only is it a big gain for the offense in question, but I think it's a mentally fatiguing, deflating moment for the other side. And that's one of the knocks I would give on Georgia for the style that it chose to play against Kentucky. Even if statistically speaking, for the most part, it kind of worked. I mean, you know, Georgia was moving the ball fairly well, even through the air when it was choosing to pass. It was, other than the couple of picks, having success. But there's never that deflating moment that makes Kentucky want to quit, right? You know, the score is close enough that they're playing for the full 60 minutes, whereas the big, high-powered offense that DeVatis is alluding to sometimes makes the other team just know they don't really have much of a chance of winning, and so therefore they make a business decision. You know, I'd love to see Georgia add that element. I won't lie to that. Keith Fold says I think the SEC was too soft on Mullen. I truly believe if Florida was playing Vanderbilt this week, I think the way they would have treated Dan Mullen likely could have been different. This is not a conspiracy. I don't think the SEC is out to help Florida hurt Georgia. I think the SEC simply doesn't want to put the thumb on the scale of what they view as a game to settle the SEC East. And there's a way of looking at this that may be the right way to do that. You know, let the game be decided on the field. But Mullen's behavior was cavalier. It's almost universally going to be criticized as kind of low rent and below the dignity of what an SEC coach should have. And the SEC just chose not to punish it commensurately because Florida's got a big game this week. But if Florida was playing a lesser opponent this upcoming Saturday, I believe the SEC would have handled Florida differently. Gary Holt says, what do you think Florida scores on us? That's a good question. I'm going to answer that. Let me also read Matt Rukavina's comment too, and I'll do both comments. He says, I'll say this needs to be the last year of the quarterback controversy between JT and Brock Vandagriff. Going forward, we need to have our guy and have him ready to go. So let me deal with both of those. First of all, on the subject of what does Florida score on us, I think if you're Georgia and you want to feel good about winning this game, I think you've got to hold Florida to 24 or less. Does that sound about right? I don't think you can say I'm going to hold them to 17 points because, you know, Florida's a little bit more explosive than that. But can you keep them to 24 and give yourself a chance to get 26, 27, 28? That, to me, is the recipe for a Georgia victory here. You know, I don't think this is a game that's played in the teens, but I think if it's a game played in the 30s, then Georgia's probably in a little bit of trouble, even against a pretty suspect Florida defense on that. So how does that sound to you, Gary? Somewhere in the neighborhood of 21, 24, something like that. I think that's enough for a Georgia victory here. As far as Matt's point about the quarterback thing, you know, I said this and y'all screamed at months ago that I said Georgia ought to treat Jamie Newman as the starter. And at the time, it was competition. Iron sharpens iron. Iron sharpens iron. Competition. Quarterback no different than any other position. I said that then and got yelled out of the room. But I do think that Matt's probably right about this, that moving forward, the value of a competition is probably less so than the value of preparation. Getting a quarterback ready to play, treating him as like your guy, and then moving forward and hoping your evaluation of the quarterback is a good one. You know, the Daniels Vandagriff comparison for 2021, just to kind of go there for a moment, would be an interesting one because let's say that Daniels doesn't play at all this year. he's just too hurt to play or whatever. Who even knows? Let's just say he doesn't play at all this year. And let's say for now it's just Vandegrift versus Daniel. It's going to be kind of interesting because they will be players of similar recruiting stature. Daniels will be more experienced. He's certainly much older, but only a little bit more experienced. I guess Daniels probably played, 14 games, 13 games, something like that in his career, 13 or 14 games. So he's a little bit more experienced, but not like wildly more experienced. He will have spent a year on campus in the Georgia offense, but I would think would give him an advantage over Vandegrift. But if Vandegrift is just a better prospect, then that experience edge might be diminished somewhat. If it's Daniels versus Vandegrift next season, I would favor JT Daniels to win that competition, but I don't think it would be blowout, cut and dry necessarily. Much the same way Jones versus Young in Alabama this year wasn't cut and dry, but eventually the more veteran presence won it. But I do think that you're probably right that overall, Georgia needs to have more of a succession plan than it has a competition plan, because I've used this analogy before. I'll use it again. For people who love golf, the way a course is judged is by the winners it produces. That great courses prove themselves as great because great winners, Hall of Famers, all-timers, are the ones that win on those courses. Some of these, Mickey Mouse tricked up courses just can produce any random, dude to win. That's not considered a great course. I would say the quarterback competition is the same way. The value of the competition is validated by the winner that it produces. I'm not quite so sure the Georgia quarterback competitions have stood the test of time on some of that. A couple more on Facebook, then we'll go to YouTube. Chris Slim White says, what is BA talking about? But the passing was working last week. Now, you can't discredit the interceptions. That's a huge part of this, and Georgia didn't throw the ball very much. And I know you don't want to hear this, but, you can look it up. These numbers are readily available on the internet. Bennett was 10-plus yards per attempt. We saw on the show last week that the benchmark number was 9. I was being generous by even allowing that because that's a pretty high number. And he was 130 yards on 13 attempts. So when he did throw it and he didn't get it intercepted, it wasn't that bad. Jay Gibson says, Carson Beck, where is he? Yeah, obviously he is the odd man out in this discussion right now, but he's also brand new out of high school. And there's just not a lot of that. And TJ Finley was the flavor of the week 2 weeks ago, the freshman from LSU, forced to play because of the Miles Brennan injury, and he threw 2 picks last week. These true freshmen have a tendency to turn into a pumpkin eventually when you throw them out there. And I would say for Carson Beck, it's kind of much the same way. Beck has just never really been on my radar to play this year because he's just a guy fresh out of high school. Doesn't mean he won't one day be good or anything like that, but in my mind, there is zero controversy about Carson Beck not playing more because Beck is totally inexperienced, and that's not a slight against him or a shot on him, but it would be weird if Carson Beck was playing football for Georgia this year, just given the fact that he's fresh out of high school. I'm about to go to YouTube here in a second. Boy, it's already pretty late, too. Blake Highland also asking about Beck as well. I get how all this, kind of comes around because people, get to know these quarterbacks pretty well. And Carson Beck may one day be, the next Eric Zier, Georgia, for all I know. But it's just not going to happen, right now. There's just not a lot of true freshmen playing right away. This has become kind of an experienced quarterbacks league a little bit. String Gene says Fromm was a freshman too. Is he better than Beck? Well, from a recruiting standpoint, he's considered much better. But from an actual playing standpoint, part of what Fromm, benefited from in 2017 is that when Eason went down, there was just really no one else to kind of turn to at the time. So part of that was just good luck for Fromm to be in the right place at the right time. But from a recruiting standpoint, the industry would say, yes, Fromm is better than Beck. GB2 says, who needs to have the better game Saturday for a win, the wide receivers or the running backs? We know we're going to run the ball effectively, but we need the wide receivers to have a big game to win. Connor mentioned this a little bit earlier, so here's how I'm going to answer this. I'm going to try not to avoid the answer. But I think you're right. I do expect Georgia to try to lean on its running game on Saturday because I think it knows it can run against Florida, and if you can, that's a good thing to do. However, from a receiver standpoint, you do need that. You probably need a hero performance on Saturday. You probably need somebody to put themselves in the Georgia-Florida Hall of Fame by the way they play. And Lawrence Cager better dadgum well going to the Georgia-Florida Hall of Fame one day. You probably need somebody to just kind of put this team on its back a little bit. One way or another, there are some offensive struggles. Even if sometimes they say about the economy, like the basic fundamentals, even if the basic fundamentals aren't quite so bad, the actual end result is not what it needs to be right now. Underlying fundamentals, sometimes they say. Even if the underlying fundamentals aren't quite so bad, the actual result, the number of points that Georgia's scoring is just too low. So Georgia needs a hero on Saturday. It was George Pickens in the Sugar Bowl, put this team on its back. It was Lawrence Cager in the Florida game a year ago, put this team on its back. So, yeah, a receiver, playing like Hercules on Saturday would not be such a bad thing. Not at all. Joseph Ford says he's a Georgia fan. He says if we don't hold Florida to 20 or less, we're not beating Florida. They will have 8 men in the box and force Stetson to beat them. Maybe so, but, nobody thought we did this yesterday on the show. No one thought Jake Fromm could beat Florida last year, too. Georgia scored 26 points a game against Power 5 competition. Fromm had just come off a game against Kentucky where he threw for 35 yards. Now, you can say it was raining, and it was. He still threw for 35 yards, and the game before that was a loss to South Carolina, which he threw for 3 picks. I can promise you, everything that's being said about Stetson Bennett right now was being said exactly about Jake Fromm a year ago. It just doesn't seem that way. People have a tendency to kind of only fixate on what their present tense emotion is. It becomes hard to imagine ever having felt some way in the past or ever feeling different in the future. But, we played the audio in yesterday's show. Kirby Smart says, y'all didn't think Jake Fromm could throw the ball. And against Florida, they threw it enough to win the game. Same thing on, this upcoming Saturday. I think that your standard of holding Florida to 17 points or 18, 19 points, something like that, that's probably a little ambitious. I think that you need to get into the 20s to win the game. But with the exception of the Kentucky game, even against, didn't Georgia score 24 first-half points against Alabama? Georgia's actually scored a little more points this year than some of you give them credit for. Nature Gator says, BA is comparing Bennett to Fromm. Really? I would love to know what's the thing that Fromm did last year. And let's just count it from same point in the season. Last year before the Florida game, Fromm played 4 SEC teams and Notre Dame. Stetson Bennett right now has played 5 SEC teams. It's a fairly interesting comparison. Bennett doesn't have a Murray State. He doesn't have a game like that, so you got to throw that out for Jake Fromm. That's the outlier. You look at the 5 Power 5 opponents that Fromm played prior to Florida and the 5 Power 5 opponents, all SEC teams that Stetson Bennett's played. What evidence is there to suggest that Fromm was having a better year than Stetson Bennett? Fromm had a good game against Tennessee, but Bennett had a good game against Tennessee. Fromm played a top 10 team in Notre Dame, but Bennett played a top 10 team in Alabama. It's actually a fairly equal comparison. The only thing that Fromm did better than Bennett thus far is he avoided interceptions at a better clip. And Bennett's lucky he doesn't have more interceptions than he does. But when it comes to touchdowns and yards per attempt, things like that, Bennett has been better than Fromm in those categories. And listen, this is not me defending Bennett because I told y'all I wouldn't. I agreed with you on that. I'm not going to break the agreement we made, but I'm also not going to point out factual inaccuracies either. Rodney Hewitt says we need to throw the ball to the backs and tight ends more. Yeah, that'd be a nice thing to see on Saturday for sure. SR says Pitts beats the double team. Kirby Smart also said this week that you can't just double team, Kyle Pitts, and that does bring guys like Kadarius Toney into the game plan a little bit more and things like that. And while Smart didn't say this, and from a football standpoint, I'm not smart enough to make this point either. But I think one of the also with the problems of like double teaming a Pitts is you're kind of pulling from 2 different position groups to do it. it's kind of like a linebacker and a safety, or a cornerback and a safety. It's like, if you're really trying to bracket him with two guys, you're kind of pulling from two of your position groups to do that, which causes all kinds of, collateral damage potentially. Mark Brantley says, my problem with the Bennett-Fromm comparison, is that Bama put the blueprint out on how to beat Bennett, play middle zone, take away the middle of the field, and make him throw the outside. Yeah, I mean, they clearly took away Karras that day. There's no question about that. Silent Chaos asks a great question. He says, if we're down at halftime and we still need to spark, or not we still, but if we need to spark, does Kirby bring in, he says JT, but it could be anybody, JT Dwan or anybody else. I don't think it's going to be JT Daniels, unless all of this is just some magnificent plan to just confuse everybody. And that, to me, seems very unlikely. I don't think it's JT Daniels. So if you go spark to get the win against Florida, you're probably looking at Dwan Mathis. If Georgia's losing on Saturday, do they do it? It's a great question. It's a great question. Because, it kind of goes back to, and I know Connor wrote about this the other day. It goes back to that 2018 game where Jake Fromm had played awful against LSU. And listen, Jake Fromm did a lot of great things in the Georgia uniform, but that LSU game was a very bad game. And the howls for Justin Fields were high going into that Florida game. And Fromm never gave you a reason to put him in that day. But what if he had? How things might have been different? We don't really know. We'll never know the answer to that. On Saturday, if it's shaky at halftime, that's a great question. It's a great question. Grun D, listen, now Grun's a troll, but he's right about this. I'll give him 100%. He's 100% right about this. He says, I've been hearing about this plan UGA hiding their real offense for about 2 years now. Listen, Grun, I know you like to come in here and pull people's chains, but you're 100% right about this. There's way too much. Hey, Georgia's going to unveil the real offense once they play blah, blah, blah. I'm right there with you 100% on that, Grun. There's way too much of that. I cannot deny that. Scott Harris says there should definitely be some packages for Dwan. Interesting to see. Texas Dog says Bennett just needs to protect the ball and know where his mismatches are. He'll be fine. Yeah, Texas, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about a little earlier. Is people think of Stetson Bennett because he's smaller and unheralded as a game manager quarterback, but the truth is that's the exact opposite what he is. I think he's played better than game manager in a couple of games this year. I think he's played like way worse than game manager in other games. I mean, it's funny that people think that Kirby sticks with Bennett because Bennett makes him feel comfortable. The truth is Bennett's reckless with the football. He runs holding it in one hand. He throws it across his body. He's really pretty reckless with the football. He's made some big throws at times, but he's not a careful quarterback. At least he has not been. So I think that you're getting to a pretty good point on Saturday. If he's going to start, it seems obvious that he will. Can he avoid the interceptions? Because, listen, if he throws 2 picks against Florida, even someone like me who doesn't think that Florida is going to be Georgia, a 2-turnover deficit, I think that Georgia can overcome a turnover against Florida. I think Georgia's good enough to overcome that. It doesn't have to be a Don Larson perfect game here. But I don't think you can have 2 picks, not extra possessions like that. I don't think you can do that. And until we see it, it's very fair to wonder, can Bennett protect the ball like he needs to? Very fair. A sad Falcons fan says, do you think JT will ever play this season? I really don't know. I just don't know. I think here'd be the most fitting thing to happen. Let's say that Georgia is up 40 against Vanderbilt in the second half. If JT Daniels comes in for a few plays, hands it off, and then that's just it. Like, that'd be a very Georgia thing to do here. Last comment, then we're gone. I'm trying to find a good one. Randy Hall says, no Jordan Davis, such a huge loss. He uses the huge. Yeah, it is. I mean, and I guess I don't expect him to play. And that's just because that's what the internet's saying. And also because Kirby Smart has a tendency to sandbag these injuries for the most part. the general philosophy I operate on is if there's any question about a guy being hurt, he's probably hurt. And Smart says we think he's going to be fine means nothing. If the word comes out that a guy's probably hurt, then he's probably hurt. And in this case, Davis is probably hurt. I think he's Georgia's single most important player. With all due respect, I actually think he's maybe even more important than even Richard LeCount. That's how important I think Davis is. But certainly to be playing without Davis and LeCount, and of the belief right now that Monty Rice is still not healthy enough to play. And I should say, that's not what I meant to say. Not 100%. That's it's tough. It is tough. I am the last one to typically use injuries as an excuse or as a reason why a team shouldn't win. I just think that, you're supposed to have, guys ready to step in and play, beyond them. I think for Georgia that remains true, but it's the specific players who are hurt that really puts that theory to the test for me. I think that Georgia can weather this storm, but it's not going to be easy. And Davis, as much as anybody, Davis is just so good at what he does. And even as he's kind of, gotten a little bit more athletic and kind of slimmed down a little bit, his ability to stop the run does not seem to have been harmed by that at all. He's just really good at this. So I hate it. Chase Smith, though, does say he bets he will play, and that'd be a great thing to see. Hey, we'll keep taking these comments throughout the week. Appreciate you being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia Today. Big thanks also to R.S. Andrews for making this portion of the show possible with our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. You can check them out for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. It's one of the reasons why we love recommending R.S. Andrews, and we believe that you truly can trust them for the work that you need. It's online at rsandrews.com. Today is also Election Day. That means you can check out Atlanta News Now at ajc.com. Of course, I guess a little bit different in the fact that most of you probably already voted, but nonetheless, it's a deadline to vote is today. We'll say it that way. But plenty of coverage in terms of how everything's going to polls and what some of these early results start coming in. AJC will be all over that. The local stuff, clearly, and also statewide, nationally as well. You can get all of that Atlanta News Now online at ajc.com. Big thanks for being here on the R.S. Andrews School Down. We'll see you tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then, everybody. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.